Sometimes the truth is the last thing people want to hear, not because they're weak, but because facing it would mean tearing down illusions they've held for years. You were told love would save you, that it would be pure, healing, unconditional, that the right woman would come along and patch up the broken parts of you, the ones you've never dared to look at on your own. Since childhood, it's been whispered in your ears, through fairy tales, movies, songs, that someone out there would one day arrive and make everything okay. And you believed it, not because you're foolish or hopeless. You believed it because no one gave you the tools to question it. But what if that promise wasn't real? What if the love you've been chasing all this time isn't salvation, but strategy? What if nature, the force people either romanticize or ignore, saw the whole thing coming from a mile away? See, nature never promised you fairy tales. Nature writes with a scalpel, not a pen. It slices through the masks, the myths, the emotional shelters we build to protect our egos. When nature looked at love, at women, at how we connect and disconnect with each other, what it saw wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't poetic or polite, but it was real. And for a lot of men, that reality is still too heavy to face. Here's the thing. You don't love her. You love what she reflects back at you. You love how she makes you feel about yourself. You love the way her attention tells you that you matter, that you're enough. But that isn't love. That's validation. And validation is not the same thing as love. What you're calling love might actually be a performance, a carefully crafted illusion that keeps you emotionally loyal without ever really seeing what's going on. Women for generations didn't have access to the same kinds of visible power that men did. They weren't handed weapons or positions of authority, so they adapted. They learned to influence from the shadows. They didn't get to fight with brute strength. They fought with silence, suggestion, subtlety, not because they're manipulative by nature, but because they had to survive in a world that didn't give them the spotlight. And that's where so many modern men miss the plot. You think she's being soft. You see her flexibility and assume it's innocence. You look at her emotional expressions and think, that's purity. But it's not. It's practiced. It's precise. It's powerful. While you're spilling your heart out, thinking you're being vulnerable and open, she's listening, closely. She's scanning your words, your tone, your energy, looking for the patterns, not out of cruelty, out of instinct. Because every vulnerability you reveal is a data point for her to map you. And once she understands your emotional blueprint, she knows exactly where to stand in your mind to make herself irreplaceable. Meanwhile, you're daydreaming about soulmates and destiny. She's thinking in terms of influence, of control, of emotional economics. She's not doing this because she's cold. She's doing it because she learned, long before you ever even noticed her, that this is the only way to survive in a world where showing her cards would mean losing the game. And you? You were raised to worship the illusion, to put her on a pedestal so high that it blinded you to her humanity. You don't want to see strategy. You want the muse, the healer, the good girl, the emotional sanctuary. But what if all those roles are just masks? What if she wears them not because they're her, but because they work? Because they've always worked? The philosopher Nietzsche didn't try to tear women down. He tried to tear down the illusions men build around them. Because as long as you keep believing that she's morally superior by nature, that her love is pure and without agenda, you will always trade your self-awareness for emotional comfort. And she'll take that power, not out of malice, but because the system taught her that this is how power works. You think you're being loved, but really, you're being managed. And the scary part? You like it that way. You like the comfort, the validation, the emotional numbing. Because as long as she's your source of peace, you don't have to confront the war happening inside you. You think heartbreak is what you fear most, but it's not. What you fear is looking in the mirror and realizing that all your longing, all your desperate need to be chosen has been a way to avoid yourself. But fear's got tricks. It can look like love. It can sound like devotion. You say you're loving her unconditionally, that you're giving everything. But really, you're bargaining. You're saying, if I give you my soul, will you fix what I can't fix in me? That's not love. That's a transaction in disguise. You're not looking for a partner. You're looking for a cure. And while you're laying your soul bare, hoping to be healed, she's not listening to your words. She's listening to your need. She's absorbing your emotional pain, not to fix it, but to understand it. Not because she's plotting, but because she knows that in relationship, knowledge is power. And now she knows the blueprint. She knows where the cracks are. Not to break you, but to position herself in your inner world as someone you cannot live without. Nature saw all of this, saw how what we call love is often just a negotiation of emotional territory. Who controls the pace? Who gives more? Who pulls back first? Those aren't acts of love, they're acts of power. And in that game, the one who needs less always holds more control. You give her your time, your energy, your identity. You think that's honesty. She gives you attention just enough to keep you reaching, and she calls that connection. But it's not connection, it's choreography. We live in a culture where women are taught to influence without appearing to lead, where men are taught to chase while thinking they're in charge. None of this is your fault. None of it is hers. It's the inheritance of centuries. Men ruled the outside world, women mastered the inner one. And in this modern age, you walk right into the trap, with a smile. She doesn't need to argue, she just needs to suggest. She doesn't need to command, she only needs to desire. And in doing so, she shapes your choices, your beliefs, your identity, without ever raising her voice. That's not manipulation, that's mastery. She's not mysterious, you just don't understand her, because you've never questioned the myths you grew up with. You still think love is unity. She knows love is leverage. And when she leaves, what hurts isn't her absence. It's the absence of the reflection she gave you. You didn't love her. You loved the way she made you feel about yourself. She wasn't your partner. She was your stage. And when the lights went out, you were left alone. Not with heartbreak, but with silence.
And here's the moment that cracks everything open. She didn't lie to you. She just stopped acting in the role you gave her. You never really saw her. You saw the story you built around her. You saw your ideal, your dream, your emotional savior. And when she stopped playing that part, when she stepped out of character, you called her cold. You said she changed. You said she broke your heart. But maybe the real betrayal was yours, because you didn't fall for her. You fell for a fantasy. And when she refused to keep performing it, you felt abandoned, not by a person, but by an illusion. See, nature doesn't take sides. Nature didn't condemn women. Nature condemns the man who refuses to grow up, the man who clings to stories of muses and angels instead of standing face to face with a real human being, complex, messy, contradictory. And if you're here, if you're still listening, maybe you're finally ready. Ready to stop blaming her. Ready to stop blaming yourself. Ready to look, not with shame, not with guilt, but with clarity. And from clarity, something rare and radical begins. Not the death of love, the transformation of it. You were raised to believe love was the highest virtue, that loving selflessly, giving endlessly was noble, that a good man sacrifices himself for the woman he loves, that this sacrifice makes him whole. But what if that selflessness was really just another form of dependency? What if the grand gestures, the emotional declarations, the endless compromises were just fear in disguise? If I don't give her everything, she'll leave. So you give more. You shrink more. You chip away at your boundaries, your truth, your identity, trying to become what you think she needs. Not because you love her, because you fear losing her. That's not romantic. That's not courageous. That's submission, dressed up in poetry. And while you're calling it bravery, she feels something else entirely: control. Not the kind of control that yells or dominates, but the kind that exists quietly, in your orbit around her approval. You adjust yourself like a satellite. You align your thoughts, your goals, your choices with her gravity, hoping to be enough, hoping to stay in her good graces. But here's a truth that most are too scared to say out loud. Love, when it's built on need, will never be equal. She might not ask you to change, but you change anyway. She might not demand your loyalty, but you offer it anyway. Why? Because you've convinced yourself that her love is your redemption, that if she accepts you, you'll finally be okay. But she never signed up to be your savior. She was just being herself. And you turned her into a mirror of your worth. So when that mirror cracks, when she pulls away, when she no longer reflects back your value, you don't just lose her, you lose your sense of identity. And that's when everything falls apart. Because it wasn't her you were protecting, it was the story. The story that said, if she stays, I'm enough. If she loves me, I matter. But stories aren't truth. They're just comforting lies we tell ourselves to avoid the harder questions. And when reality shows up, when it shatters the illusion, you call it betrayal. But Nietzsche wouldn't call it betrayal. He'd call it awakening. Because the real lie wasn't that she had power. It was that you never saw it. You thought she was gentle. She was observant. You thought she was nurturing. She was strategic. You thought she surrendered. She was choosing, always choosing. Because she understood something you didn't. The one who sees the game, even if they never speak of it, wins. And now, maybe for the first time, you're starting to see. You look back on moments where she smiled at you, but something behind the smile felt calculated. You remember how she seemed to sense your emotions before you even said a word. You thought it was magic, intuition, soul connection. And it was intuition. But for her, intuition isn't fantasy, it's survival. She's had to stay one step ahead to navigate a world where direct power wasn't an option. So she honed the art of emotional positioning. She became a master of relational influence, not because she's evil or deceptive, but because that's the only kind of power she was allowed to develop. This isn't about blame. It's about reality. We live in a world where love is marketed as mutual surrender, but played out as mutual leverage, where vulnerability is preached as virtue, but used as currency, where emotional intimacy becomes a silent negotiation of who will give more and who will hold back first. And the moment you see this, you're faced with a choice. You either grow up or you break down. Most men break. They go back to the myth. They look for another muse, another woman to reflect worth back to them. They say, this time will be different, but it won't, because the roles haven't changed, only the actors have. Until you stop needing her to play the part, you'll never meet the person. So what happens when the mask finally falls away? When you stop seeking validation and start seeing clearly, you begin to notice what's been there all along. Not deception, not manipulation, just instinct. A woman aware of her limited power in a world built for men who learned to survive by mastering the only influence she had, relationship. She never wanted to control you. She just wanted to protect herself. And to do that, she had to become emotionally agile. She had to learn how to be essential without being obvious. That's not weakness. That's genius. That's resilience. So stop asking if she ever loved you. Start asking if you were ever ready to see her without the illusion. Because only when the mask is on, hers and yours, can something real finally begin. Not a fairy tale, a revolution.
So now, you're standing here, stripped of the illusion. The fantasy has burned away, and in the ashes, there's something uncomfortable, but real. You're not heartbroken, you're not abandoned, you're exposed. The mask you wore for her is gone, and so is the one you asked her to wear for you. What's left is raw clarity. And maybe, for the first time, you're not asking, why didn't she love me? You're asking, why did I need her love to feel whole? That shift changes everything. Because when love is no longer a desperate search for salvation, when it stops being a transaction, a bargaining chip, a performance, it becomes something else. It becomes presence, honesty, power, not over someone, but with them. But here's the hard part. Most people aren't ready for that kind of love. They're not ready for the kind of love that doesn't flatter their ego. They want the highs, the devotion, the fairy tale drama. They want the illusion back. Because without it, things get quiet. And that silence, it's not empty. It's confronting. It's in that silence you realize just how much of your identity was built around being needed, wanted, worshipped. You realize you weren't seeking partnership, you were seeking permission. Permission to feel valuable, to feel real. And she gave you that for a while. She became your emotional stage, your mirror, your muse. And when she stepped down, you didn't just lose her, you lost the role you were playing. But now comes the question that matters most. What if you didn't need her to complete you? What if she was never meant to be your answer, but simply a reflection of your questions? Because until you let go of needing her to validate your existence, you'll never truly see her. And more importantly, you'll never truly see yourself. Think back to every relationship where things felt off, where you were chasing closeness, but it always felt just out of reach, where your vulnerability felt like bravery, but somehow turned into powerlessness. Now ask yourself, were you really being vulnerable? Or were you performing vulnerability to earn affection? Were you opening your heart? Or were you negotiating love? That's what nobody teaches you. That love rooted in fear always turns into performance, and performance always turns into resentment. You thought you were giving. She thought you were pleasing. Both of you were just afraid to lose the upper hand. Because the moment someone needs more, they lose. And so modern love becomes a chess game played in silence. Who texts first? Who apologizes first? Who loves more? It's not romance. It's strategy. It's leverage. It's control disguised as connection. And the scariest part? Most of us play this game without even knowing we're doing it. Because culture teaches us roles, not reality. Men are taught to pursue, protect, provide. Women are taught to attract, adapt, influence. No one is taught how to see each other beyond the mask. So we keep reenacting the same tired stories. Men chasing the good girl, the healer, the redeemer. Women shaping themselves into whatever mask gets them safety, attention, power. It's not conscious, it's cultural, it's survival. But here's where things shift. If you're willing to drop the story, not just about her, but about yourself, you open the door to something radical, real love. Not the kind that consumes or completes you, the kind that reveals you. Because now you've seen behind the curtain. You've felt what it's like to confuse comfort with connection. You've tasted the emotional anesthesia of being worshipped, and now you're sober. And in this new space, there's no pedestal, no fantasy, just two flawed people choosing each other without needing to be saved. But to stand in that space, you need strength. Not the kind that dominates, the kind that owns itself. You need to be able to say, I'm not here to be completed. I'm already whole. I'm not here to impress. I'm here to connect. I don't need your love to feel worthy. I want your love because I'm already worthy. That's the shift. That's the revolution. And that's the kind of man who can finally love, not as a transaction, not as a performance, but as truth. Because when you stop asking her to be your mirror, she becomes something else. Not your savior, not your stage, your equal. You stop needing her love to feel alive, and in doing so, you make space for something deeper. Respect, mutual presence. A relationship built not on emotional dependency, but on shared clarity. And that's terrifying at first, because it's unfamiliar. You're used to chasing. You're used to being needed. You're used to the story. But if you stay with it, if you sit in that discomfort, you'll find a freedom most men never taste. The freedom of not needing to be chosen. Because now, you've chosen yourself. And from that space, love becomes something else entirely. Not a role, not a rescue, a revolution. If anything in this opened your eyes, even just a little, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, not for views, not for likes, but because someone else out there is still stuck in the illusion, still living the myth, still waiting for a woman to heal what only he can face. If you're done with fairy tales, if you're done with the emotional anesthesia, if you're ready to see love not as salvation, but as self-awareness, then welcome to the other side. And if you're still here, then maybe you're ready. Welcome to reality. Let's build from here.